Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
It's the best.
And the worst.
Yo! He dead! Oh, he dead for sure!
And the good.
And the bad. A lot of fans love this movie for numerous reasons, and some fans hate it for some obvious reasons. So today we'll be analyzing and providing opinions on why King of the Monsters is both the best and the worst of the Monsterverse.
We're not the biggest fans of the Monsterverse movies, but there are some things that we genuinely like about them. So, just know we are approaching the topic as people who are fans of Godzilla and like good movies. Not necessarily as legendary fanboys, but we'll try to voice the opinions of all sides of the fandom in this video. Hello everyone, I am Mio.
And I am Guido, and to acknowledge one of the bigger elephants in the room, all the Monsterverse movies are chock full of plot holes, contrivances, and silly MacGuffins. If you don't think these movies have these issues, and that they all make perfect sense, God bless your heart.
We're not saying that you should make allowances for bad writing and weird plot holes in movies. Not saying that that should kill your enjoyment of certain movies either, but we're going to ignore these plot holes for the most part for the sake of keeping this video under 2 hours, because most of King of the Monsters doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Another short section before we get into the nitty-gritty is the story as a whole, not counting plot holes. King of the Monsters, I believe, has the most interesting concept for a story in the Monsterverse so far. I mean, come on, kaiju terrorists, that's pretty neat. Though it does strike me as something that they would put into a Jurassic World movie.
And the plotline of the Orca device is a bit reminiscent of the Half-Century War, which is a Godzilla comic that is arguably better than this movie.
All the other Monsterverse movies feel like a series of events that occur because they have to occur.
It all just kind of happened.
But King of the Monsters has characters with agency, and the story has a sense of realism, as silly as that might sound.
The events that happen in this movie for the most part make sense in the confines of the world the writers have built for the movie. And the world building of this movie is the best in the Monsterverse. It introduces some cool ideas and concepts that aren't too hard to swallow, progressing from the 2014 movie. And it sets up well for future sequels.
I would say Godzilla vs. Kong definitely took some of the sci-fi fantasy elements a bit too far, but that's not the topic of this video.
One of the most debated topics when it comes to the Godzilla fandom is Godzilla screen time. Some people seem to think,
oh, Godzilla isn't in the movie as much as I wanted. It's a bad movie.
And some people say,
stop complaining and enjoy your 9 minutes of kaiju action sprinkled into a 2-hour movie filled to the brim with nonsensical human story slop.
However, a lot of people, ourselves included, don't care too much about how much Godzilla is in the film, although I think there might be a bare minimum amount if you're going to call it a Godzilla movie. Instead, we are more interested in whether or not the Godzilla scenes are impactful to the story and or so awesome you want to stand up and clap like white people when a plane lands.
All that being said, you can have some of the best kaiju scenes ever. But if you have a stupid and boring human plot to sit through while you wait for the next big monster fight, you're gonna have some problems. And that's where one of King of the Monsters' biggest weaknesses pops up.
We'll talk about the fight scenes and the monsters themselves in a little bit, but let's talk about these pacing issues. Like we said earlier, the story itself isn't the worst in the Monsterverse. Unfortunately, the scenes of kaiju mass destruction are few and far between scenes of humans talking and not doing much of interest. It sometimes helps with the world building, but sometimes the scenes are so boring that not many people will stay awake to pay attention.
I would have liked to have just a few more kaiju moments, especially during the Mass Awakening scene. Not showing everything, of course, but giving us something more substantial. Instead, we just get some really quick shots. The cutting away to human slop in King of the Monsters isn't as bad as 2014, where every time Godzilla roars, Gareth Edwards was like,
"That's enough, gotta leave him wanting more!"
But it's still kind of frustrating.
I don't understand why the movie always seems so eager to get back to the human level drama, because the human level drama isn't very interesting. It's basically, oh look, Mark is doing something, how exciting. Madison has locked herself in a room because she doesn't like her mother, how riveting. In concept, a lot of stuff in the movie should be pretty interesting, like kaiju terrorists, like we said, but in execution, it's not very engaging.
The movie overall can be considered somewhat of a drag to get through. But do you want to know the biggest reason why people dislike the human story in King of the Monsters? Spoiler warning, it's because of the humans.
Before we dive into the characters, I would just like to state that people who say,
nobody cares about the humans, we only care about Godzilla,
are quite silly. I think minus one prove that you can have both really good Godzilla scenes and truly impactful human stories.
I think the main reason the Monsterverse, excluding 2014, doesn't even bother trying to have a memorable human story is because they know most fans will just be thankful to have another Godzilla movie. But back to the subject at hand. When it comes to characters, specifically human characters, King of the Monsters is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, you have characters that have actual understandable motivations, most of them anyway. And on the other hand, you have poor acting direction and clunky dialogue. And bad characters.
For the most part, King of the Monsters characters are better and more human-like than the other movies in the MonsterVerse, specifically Godzilla vs. Kong, but they are indeed flawed.
Mark is a full-blown Gary Stu. He knows how to do everything. He always calls the shots, and does and says things that you'd expect Serizawa to do if Serizawa wasn't just a cameo character. I like the fact that he kind of hates Godzilla and just wants to find his daughter, but the film isn't great at utilizing that to its advantage. His hatred for Godzilla just kind of changes, I guess, and him wanting to find his daughter is just him trying to find his daughter sometimes. Nothing more, nothing less.
He has a certain area of expertise when it comes to, I guess, studying wolves, but also developing the orca. But the movie doesn't really utilize that. He only really uses his orca signal cracking skills in the end of the movie, and that to not very much effect.
I think they actually could have done more with this character by tying his story together more with Serizawa, so that we can assume better that he knows more about Godzilla than other people, and so that makes sense that he take over Serizawa's job later.
Speaking of Serizawa, he's not very much in this movie. His assistant randomly dies, and he's kind of sad, and really Mark, like we said before, takes a lot of the spotlight, and Serizawa just kind of tags along and looks a little bit confused. And then he just dies in what I guess you could refer to as an emotional scene and a tribute and farewell. However, I was just annoyed that we lost Serizawa in the second movie and him not being in it very much.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Madison just exists in this movie. No real opinion on her. The only reason she does anything in this movie is because the plot says so. I guess she takes after her father in that way. One good thing they'll give her is that she's not as boring and insufferable in this movie as she is in Godzilla vs. Kong, which can be said for all the characters in King of Monsters.
Emma is actually one of my favorite characters. I know it's pretty shocking to say, because she's an okay to kind of bad person who's doing very bad things. Her entire reasoning for releasing the Titans is stupid and makes no sense, and people call her out on it, and it feels good.
I'm also glad that the movie doesn't push that her narrative was correct, or at least it failed to communicate that. Ecoterrorism is no good. Though Therese wanted her to be sympathetic, it probably would have been better to have her want to avoid killing people rather than her being an inhuman monster. She helps balance the story a bit because if we just had Ellen Jonah for the bad human character, the film would have been that much more predictable.
However, her story does bring in one of the biggest, most obvious plot holes in the movie that actually sort of breaks up the story because her plan doesn't make any sense. It really sticks out because most of the other plot points in the movie kind of make sense, or could make sense.
Ellen Jonah is played by an actor who is too good for this movie. The character doesn't have a ton going on, but he comes off as a rather capable British man, and he does have a scene where he calls out Emma for her bull. At least Charles Dance enjoyed the catering.
Rick and Chen contribute some of the worst character interactions in the movie, quite possibly in the franchise.
Bigger, meaner.
We don't know that, Rick.
Oh yeah? Just wait for it, Chen.
Writing.
Every time I hear it, it makes me cringe.
Now to the slightly more interesting characters in the movie, the monsters. Firstly, Godzilla. While I'm not the biggest fan of the Monster vs. Godzilla, I think King of the Monsters gives him a well-balanced personality. A lot of people didn't like the whole hero thing in 2014, which I guess is fair. I think the movie would have been a lot better if it was a Gamera movie. And in my opinion, Godzilla vs. Kong made Godzilla a bit too petty. King of the Monsters just gives us the 2014 version again, but because he's not treated as a 100% hero, it fits the feel of the movie more. Basically, Godzilla's just here to do his job. One might say this makes him a bit boring, and I really have no response to that. As far as the redesigns from 2014, I think they did a pretty good job. I like the spikes and also the atomic breath quite a bit more.
King of the Monsters somehow gave us one of, if not the coolest version of Rodan. They did an exceptional job with his redesign. I especially like his wings and how he's more proportionally similar to that of an actual pterodactyl, so he can physically fly, and his fiery appearance and the way that he glows when he's flying is pretty darn cool. In addition, his bursting out of the volcano is arguably the best scene in the entire Monsterverse. My only complaint is the fact that they gave him a fish personality
Kneel before Zod!
and gave him very little to do in the movie.
Mothra is pretty cool when you actually get to see her. The design is fine. Both she and Rodan are more or less slapped into the movie just for like fan service, which is nice, but it could have been handled with a little bit more thought. Also, the twins that they introduced into the movie are a really half-hearted attempt. They actually have nothing to do with the plot whatsoever.
King Ghidorah is easily the best antagonist in the Monsterverse, and one of the main reasons King of the Monsters is the best, and still the worst, of the Monsterverse. Much like Rodan, they did a really good job with the redesign, and while I'm still a fan of the more puppety Ghidorah, I think the grittier, angrier looking approach lends well to his evil side. And the actors for the monsters did a good job. The movie also shows that Ghidorah has a smidge of personality, which is always nice to see. All these factors and more make Ghidorah leagues more interesting than the Mutos, Mechagodzilla, and whatever its name is from Skull Island.
Go, you you know the thing.
His death scene is a little lackluster though, although I'm definitely in the minority on that opinion.
Now that we've covered all the characters and monsters and everything, let's look at the action, which is where most of the praise for the movie comes from.
The action scenes in the Monsterverse are a bit hit and miss. 2014 was criticized for being too hard to see and split up between the human stuff, and Godzilla vs. Kong is typically praised for how easy it is to follow the fight scenes. I agree with this praise, even though I still don't like the movie.
King of the Monsters falls somewhere in the middle, I would say. The action scenes, I would say, are the coolest in concept, but the execution could have been a lot better. The action scenes aren't quite as dark as 2014, although still pretty dark, but the scenes are still not easy to follow. The main reason being too much shaky cam and too much cutting away to characters I still do not care about. Like, yes, I'm not hoping that Madison is dead, but I would really like to see what happens when Mothra and Rodan fight, and how the frick Rodan didn't just tear her to shreds immediately.
Or earlier in the movie when Rodan is chasing the big ship thing. We're forced to watch Mark take charge and try to endanger, but inevitably save everyone's lives using his Gary Stu powers.
Taking a break from the criticism real quick, there's some very, very cool moments in this movie. In short, the movie suffers a lot from cutting away from the action sequences, and ultimately it makes the movie a little bit frustrating to watch, especially in the finale.
We keep flipping back over to the human protagonists, which by far are not the most interesting part of the scene.
Speaking of the finale, the battle isn't super well thought out. Basically, Godzilla powers up and starts whooping King Ghidorah. Then Ghidorah powers up and starts whooping Godzilla. Then Ghidorah drops Godzilla from the sky, causing what would likely be an extinction-level event in Boston.
Right now, the impact will kill thousands.
But nah, it's just a light little breeze. Then we end with Godzilla getting souped up on Mothra powder. Then Ghidorah burns up. Overall, it's just an arbitrary back and forth between who's winning to make things feel more like a regular movie, I guess. There's no real ebb and flow in the battle, it just kind of happens.
Quick note, it is a little confusing if you aren't paying attention because Monarch blew up the nuclear weapon to revive Godzilla, but if things hadn't worked out, they would have just killed him accidentally because he's about to go thermonuclear. Also, I guess the reason he started losing again is because he was overheating from the nuclear energy stuff, and it's kind of easy to miss that detail, otherwise it just looks like he starts losing for no reason.
However, despite the issues, the final battle scene has some pretty cool moments, such as when Godzilla and King Ghidorah clash in the beginning. And there are a lot of those moments sprinkled throughout the entire film, such as when Rodan awakens, as we mentioned, Godzilla firing his breath into the sky, Godzilla and Ghidorah fighting in Antarctica, and nearly anything with Ghidorah, really, and some of the kaiju action in the background.
All of these things make for some pretty cool posters and desktop backgrounds.
Most of the cinematography in this movie is pretty chef's kiss.
Very cinematic, as they say. Can you smell the cinema?
To wrap it all up, King of the Monsters is not the greatest written movie, but it has some very cool ideas, and accomplishes its goal of being a love letter to Godzilla fans.
This is not an exhaustive review, we've just shared our thoughts on the movie in this video. But please let us know your thoughts in the comments.
And if this video reaches 500 likes, or at least a decent amount of likes and attention, then we'll do a similar video for Kong Skull Island, which might be the most underrated movie in the Monsterverse.
Pretty hot take. But if nobody cares, we'll just go ahead and make a video on the Monsterverse as a whole later anyway.
Probably sometime after Godzilla x Kong. But until then, if you want to watch one of our other videos, check out this one over here. It's about the Morbius writers, and I think it turned out pretty well, even though no one really watched it.
And if you want another Godzilla related video, we have one of those over here. This is not a Godzilla channel, but we do talk about it sometimes.
Until we see you there, he's Mia.
And he's Keto.
And we hope that you have a blessed day.
Bye!